Check your father's IV bag. Check your father's IV bag. 5 words. That is all it took to change everything. But before we get to those words, before we get to the girl who said them, and the man who almost did not listen, there is something you need to understand about Harlan Ashford. He was not the kind of man who lay still. For 71 years, Harlan Ashford had been a man of motion. A man who woke before the sun and went to bed long after it had given up on the day. A man who had built an empire from a single hardware store on the east side of Detroit, back when that part of the city still had hope and sawdust on the floors. He had poured concrete. He had driven trucks. He had signed his first $1 million contract with hands that still had grease under the fingernails. And now he was lying in a hospital bed on the 12th floor of St. Catherine's Medical Center. His chest held together with surgical wire, his heartbeat measured by a machine that beeped in slow patient intervals, like a clock that was not sure how much time was left. The surgery had been 3 days ago, a triple bypass. The doctors had used words like successful and optimistic and recovery timeline. They had smiled the way doctors smile when they want the family to leave so they can get back to the patients who are not billionaires. Harlan had nodded at all of it. He had thanked the surgeon. He had squeezed his son's hand once briefly, because that was the most affection Harlan Ashford allowed himself in front of other people. And then everyone had left, and the room had gone quiet. And Harlan had closed his eyes, but he was not sleeping. That was the thing about Harlan that most people never understood. When his eyes were closed, his mind was more awake than most people's minds would ever be. He listened. He measured. He calculated. He had built a $1.7 billion company by paying attention to the things other people missed, and he was not about to stop now just because his chest was wrapped in bandages and his arms were full of tubes. He could hear the nurses talking at the station down the hall. He could hear the elevator doors opening and closing. He could hear the soft rubber squeak of shoes on the polished floor. And he could hear his son Garrett stepping out of the room with his phone already pressed to his ear. Garrett was 46 years old. He had been running the day-to-day operations of Ashford Holdings for 14 years. He was smart. He was capable. He was also the kind of man who could not sit still for more than 20 minutes without reaching for his phone, and Harlan had never quite figured out whether that was a strength or a flaw. The door closed softly behind Garrett. Harlan opened his eyes. The room was dim. The curtains were half drawn. Late afternoon light came through the gap in thin golden lines that fell across the floor and climbed partway up the wall before giving up. The IV pole stood beside the bed. A clear plastic bag hung from the metal hook, the tube running down in a gentle curve toward the inside of his left arm. The drip was slow and steady. One drop, then another, then another. Harlan looked at it the way he looked at everything. Carefully. Then he closed his eyes again. Not because he was tired, because he was thinking about Jackie. Jacqueline Ashford, his wife, 41 years old, 30 years younger than him. The woman who had been his late wife's nurse during those final terrible months when Margaret Ashford was dying of ovarian cancer in the master bedroom of the Connecticut house, and the whole world smelled like medicine and lavender and quiet, unstoppable loss. Jackie had been kind during those months. She had been patient. She had changed the sheets without being asked, and brought tea without being told, and sat with Margaret during the long afternoons when Harlan could not bear to watch his wife disappear one more inch into the bed. And when Margaret finally died on a Tuesday morning in March with the windows open and the birds doing something cruel and beautiful outside, Jackie had held Harlan's hand. Not Margaret's. Harlan's. He should have noticed that. He should have asked himself why in that moment the nurse was comforting the husband instead of tending to the patient. But grief does strange things to a man's judgment. It opens doors that should stay closed. It makes you reach for warmth wherever you can find it, even when the warmth is not meant for you. 6 months after the funeral, Harlan married Jackie at a courthouse in Stamford, Connecticut. He did not tell his children. He did not tell his lawyer. He did not tell Mrs. Brennan, the housekeeper who had been with the family for 22 years and who knew more about the Ashford household than anyone alive. He simply did it, and when his children found out, the silence on the other end of the phone had been louder than any argument could have been. Garrett had said nothing for 11 seconds. Harlan counted. Elaine, his daughter, the artist who lived in Vermont and painted landscapes that nobody bought, had said only, "I hope you know what you're doing, Dad." Boyd, his youngest, had laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh that meant he was already 2 drinks into the afternoon and did not have the energy to pretend he cared. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of Jackie sleeping in the bed where Margaret had died. 6 years of Jackie redecorating rooms that had not needed redecorating. 6 years of Jackie's perfume replacing Margaret's in the bathroom, in the closets, in the quiet spaces of the house where memory lives. Harlan had told himself it was fine. He had told himself that a man was allowed to find companionship after loss. That age did not disqualify a person from wanting to be touched and spoken to, and looked at the way Jackie looked at him in those early months, like he was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. But something had changed. He was not sure exactly when. Maybe a year ago, maybe longer. The way you cannot say exactly when autumn starts, you just look up one day and the leaves are different. He had noticed small things first. Money moving from accounts he did not check often. Not large amounts. Just enough to notice if you were the kind of man who noticed things, and Harlan Ashford had always been that kind of man. Then the phone calls. Jackie would be talking in the kitchen, her voice low and warm, and when Harlan walked in, she would end the call quickly. Not suspiciously, just smoothly. The way a person ends a call when they have practiced ending calls. One afternoon, he had picked up the house phone in his study. At the same moment, Jackie answered the extension in the bedroom. A man's voice. Deep, confident. The kind of voice that belonged to a man who was used to being listened to. "When will you be free?" the voice had asked. Jackie had said, "I don't know. Probably Thursday. He has a board meeting." Harlan had set the phone down very quietly. He did not confront her. He did not mention it at dinner. He sat in his study that evening, stroking his beard, the old habit that surfaced whenever a problem was too large to solve in one sitting, and he thought about what he had just heard. He had heard his wife schedule time with another man around his calendar. There was something in that sentence that hurt more than the infidelity itself. Around his calendar. Like he was an obstacle to be worked around, a meeting to be avoided, a slow, predictable thing that could be managed with a little planning. A few weeks later, Jackie told him a man had called about the garden. She said it was the landscaper asking about the hedges along the south wall. Harlan looked at her across the dinner table. "We don't have a gardener," he said. Jackie blinked once. "I meant the service, the lawn service," she said, recovering quickly. Harlan nodded and went back to his soup. But he did not forget. He never forgot. 3 months before the surgery, Harlan did something he had never done in 71 years of living. He hired a private investigator. The man's name was not important. What was important was what the man found. His name was Victor Dane, 43 years old. Described himself as a financial consultant, which as far as Harlan could tell, meant he consulted wealthy women on how to redirect their husband's money into accounts he controlled. Dane had debts, several of them. He drove a car he could not afford, and wore watches he had not paid for, and lived in an apartment that was exactly expensive enough to impress the kind of women who were impressed by apartments. Jackie had been seeing him for more than 2 years. The investigator had photographs. He had hotel receipts. He had phone records showing calls at hours when Jackie had told Harlan she was at the spa, or visiting a friend, or attending a charity board meeting that, according to the charity's records, had never taken place. Harlan had received the full report 3 days before entering the hospital for his surgery. He had read it alone in his study. He had read it twice. Then he had set it down on his desk and sat very still for a long time, his hand resting on the arm of the leather chair that Margaret had picked out 30 years ago. He was not angry. That surprised him. He was ashamed. Ashamed because he had known. Somewhere beneath the surface, in the part of himself that he did not like to visit, he had known from the beginning. He had known that a 35-year-old nurse does not fall in love with a 65-year-old widower. He had known that the warmth he felt from Jackie was the kind of warmth that could be turned on and off like a lamp. He had known all of it, and he had married her anyway. Because loneliness is a kind of hunger, and hungry men do not inspect the food. The next morning, Harlan called his lawyer. Arthur Whitfield had been his attorney for 30 years. A careful man, a trustworthy man, the kind of man who kept secrets the way a vault keeps gold without any interest in spending it. Arthur Harlan said, "I need a new will." The current will, signed 4 years earlier, gave Jackie 30% of the estate. At Harlan's current net worth, that meant somewhere in the range of $500 million. The new will would give her $3 million, a structured settlement, the right to live in the Connecticut house for the rest of her life. and nothing else. Arthur had not asked why. That was one of the things Harlan appreciated about him. The new will was drafted. It sat in Arthur's office waiting for Harlan's signature. The signing was scheduled for Monday, 4 days after his expected discharge from the hospital. 4 days. Harlan had thought that was soon enough. He had been wrong about that, but that part of the story comes later. Now he was lying in the bed, eyes closed, the IV dripping, the machines beeping, and somewhere in the back of his mind a question was turning over slowly like a stone in a riverbed. Did she know about the new will? He had not told her directly. He was careful about that. But 3 weeks ago over dinner he had been tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying a secret that weighs more than you expected. And he had said something. "I've been thinking about updating some legal matters," he told her over the roast that Mrs. Brennan had prepared. "Making sure the people who have stood by me through my life are properly taken care of." He had not mentioned numbers. He had not mentioned her name. But Jackie was not a stupid woman. She had never been a stupid woman. She would have heard everything he did not say. And that thought had stayed with Harlan for 3 weeks, sitting in the back of his mind like a low hum that he could not quite identify. A frequency just below hearing. A warning just below consciousness. Now he lay in the hospital bed listening to the sounds of the 12th floor and wondering whether the warning had come too late. That was when he heard it. A voice in the hallway, small, steady, serious. "Check your father's IV bag, sir. Please, you have to check it now." Harlan did not open his eyes, but he listened. He heard Garrett's voice, impatient, distracted. The voice of a man who had too many things on his mind and not enough patience for a child's interruption. Then the girl's voice again, calm in a way that children are not usually calm, explaining something about a nurse without a badge, a nurse who had come into the room alone when there should have been two, a nurse who had left by the stairs instead of the elevator. Harlan heard his son hesitate. He heard the doubt in Garrett's breathing, and then he heard the door open. Garrett walked back into the room. Harlan kept his eyes closed. He felt his son lean close to the IV pole. He heard the tiny click of a phone flashlight. He felt the quality of the silence change the way silence changes when someone sees something they were not supposed to see. "Security," Garrett said quietly into his phone. "Room 1217 now." Harlan Ashford did not move. He did not open his eyes. But somewhere deep inside his chest, beneath the surgical wire and the healing tissue, he felt something that was not pain. It was confirmation. The thing he had feared was real. And a 9-year-old girl standing in a hallway with an armload of towels had just confirmed it. The next 2 hours happened around Harlan like a storm he watched from inside a window. He kept his eyes closed for most of it. He listened. He heard the security guards arrive. He heard the older one, the one with the low voice, say the words, "2 puncture sites, and that shouldn't be there." He heard the IV line being clamped. He heard the bag being removed and placed inside something, a container, a sealed bag, something with a zipper. He heard the doctor, then the floor supervisor, then a man whose voice he recognized as Dr. Langford, the chief administrator. A careful man, the kind of man hospitals put in charge of the things that need to be handled carefully. "We will run a full toxicology on the fluid immediately," Dr. Langford said, speaking to Garrett in the corner of the room with the kind of quiet that is louder than shouting. Harlan heard every word. He heard Dr. Langford say, "If what you are suggesting is true, this is a police matter." He heard Garrett say, "I know." He heard Dr. Langford ask, "Do you have any reason to believe someone would want to harm your father?" And then there was a pause that told Harlan more than any answer could have, because his son was thinking about it. His son was standing in a hospital room at the bedside of his nearly murdered father, and he was thinking about whether to say her name. "No reason that I can think of," Garrett said finally, and Harlan, eyes closed, thought, "Yes, you can, you just don't want to say it out loud." Neither did I. He understood his son's hesitation. He shared it. The word Jackie was not just a name in their family. It was a fault line. Saying it out loud in this context would crack open 6 years of dinners and holidays and awkward silences, and everything that had been kept polite and manageable would suddenly become very real. Harlan decided in that moment to keep his eyes closed a little longer. Not because he was afraid of what was happening, because he needed to think. He needed to think the way he had thought in 1983 when the bank called his loan on the hardware store and gave him 72 hours to come up with $40,000 or lose everything. He had sat in a folding chair in the back of the store for 6 hours, not moving, not speaking, his hand on his chin, his mind turning the problem over and over until he found the crack in the wall and pushed through it. This was the same, different stakes, same process. Someone had tried to kill him, not with a gun, not with violence, with patience, with planning, with a substance that would stop his heart and leave no obvious trace. They had chosen the hospital because a death here after cardiac surgery would look like exactly what everyone expected it might look like. A complication, a sad but unsurprising outcome. No autopsy, no investigation, just a funeral and a reading of the will and a quiet redistribution of $1.7 billion. Harlan thought about that number. He had spent his whole life building it, and someone had decided it was worth more than his heartbeat. That was the part that cut deepest. Not the betrayal, not the infidelity, not even the attempt on his life. The arithmetic. Someone had looked at him, Harlan Ashford, 71 years old, husband, father, grandfather, builder of a company that employed 17,000 people, and they had reduced him to a number. He was worth more dead. That was the calculation. That was the math someone had done in a room somewhere sitting across from someone else, maybe over coffee, maybe late at night, and they had come to a conclusion. Harlan Ashford alive was an obstacle. Harlan Ashford dead was a payday. He thought about Jackie sitting across from Victor Dane in one of those hotels the investigator had photographed. He imagined them talking, not about love, about logistics. How long do we wait? When does the money come? What if he changes the will? That last question, that was the one that mattered. Because somewhere in the last 3 weeks between the dinner where Harlan mentioned updating his legal matters and the surgery that put him in this bed, someone had decided that waiting was no longer an option. The timeline was clear. The new will was scheduled to be signed Monday. If Harlan died before Monday, the old will would stand. Jackie would receive 30%, roughly $500 million. If he lived past Monday, she would receive $3 million. The difference was $497 million, and the window was closing. Today was Thursday. The surgery had been Monday. The plan Harlan now understood was for him to die sometime between Thursday and Sunday in his hospital bed from what would appear to be a cardiac complication. It would have worked. It would have worked perfectly. Except for a girl named Lily. Harlan thought about her. A child, 9 years old. Her mother cleaned the floors of the hospital where billionaires recovered from heart surgery. She had been carrying towels. She had been watching. She had been paying attention the way children sometimes pay attention with a kind of pure, uncalculated awareness that adults lose somewhere along the way. She had seen a nurse without a badge. She had noticed the wrong number of people doing the right task at the wrong time. She had remembered what her mother taught her, you can tell who works here by the badge. And she had spoken up. Not to the security guards, not to the nurses at the station, not to any of the adults whose job it was to notice things. She had spoken to a man walking out of a hospital room with a phone pressed to his ear. And that man, Harlan's own son, had almost not listened. Harlan felt something move through him at that thought. Not anger at Garrett, gratitude for the girl, and something else, something harder to name, like the feeling you get when you realize that the most important moment of your life happened while you were not paying attention. He owed his life to a 9-year-old. There was a strange poetry in that if you were the kind of man who noticed poetry. Harlan was not generally. But lying in a hospital bed with surgical wire in your chest and poison in your IV bag tends to adjust your perspective on a number of things. The toxicology results came back at 7:14 that evening. Dr. Langford delivered the news in the doorway of the new room 1234, where they had moved Harlan after the discovery. Garrett was standing near the window. The private security guards, 2 of them now, were posted outside the door. Harlan's eyes were open for this part. The IV bag contained the standard saline solution, Dr. Langford said quietly, but it also contained a high concentration of potassium chloride. The room went very still. Harlan knew what potassium chloride was. He did not know much about medicine, but he had read enough to know that those words belonged in the same sentence as the word execution. Dr. Langford continued, "At the concentration we found, given the patient's age and cardiac condition, it would have caused cardiac arrest within 40 to 60 minutes. It would have presented as a post-surgical complication, a heart attack in a recovering patient. There would have been no reason to suspect anything. There would not have been an autopsy. Garrett's face was white. Harlan's face was not. Harlan looked at the ceiling and stroked his beard slowly the way a man does when he is not surprised, but is finally hearing out loud the thing he already knew in his bones. "So someone tried to murder me," Harlan said, his voice rough from the breathing tube that had been removed the day before, "and make it look like my heart gave out." "Yes," Dr. Langford said. The word hung in the room like smoke. Garrett walked to the window and stood there for a long time looking out at the city. The lights were beginning to come on one by one, the way they always did, as if nothing in the world had changed. Harlan watched his son. He could see the tension in Garrett's shoulders. He could see the way his son's hand gripped the windowsill. He could see the question forming in Garrett's mind, the question he did not want to ask, the same question Harlan had been living with for 3 months. But there was something else Harlan needed to do first. "The girl," Harlan said. Garrett turned. "The girl who told you about the bag. Where is she now?" Garrett hesitated. "She's in the room. I asked her to stay. I didn't want anyone in the hallway to see her talking to me." "Where is her mother?" "Her mother works here. She cleans this floor and the one below. Her name is Denise Harper. I've asked Dr. Langford to bring her up, privately." Harlan nodded slowly. "Garrett," he said. "Yes, Dad. Nobody finds out it was the girl, not the staff, not the police, not anyone in this family. If whoever did this learns that a child saw something, that child becomes a target. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "How many men do you have watching her?" "One. Send 3. Move them tonight. A hotel, not under their real names. Cash." Garrett stared at his father. For a moment, Harlan saw something shift in his son's eyes. Not surprise, recognition. His son was seeing the man who had built Ashford Holdings from nothing. The man who had survived bank calls and hostile takeovers and a recession that killed half the businesses in Detroit. The man who, even from a hospital bed with wire in his chest, could think 3 moves ahead. "I'll do it now," Garrett said. He pulled out his phone and left the room. Harlan lay back against the pillow. He was tired. Not the tired of a man who needs sleep. The tired of a man who has been carrying a weight for 3 months and has just felt it double. He closed his eyes. He thought about Denise Harper, a woman he had never met, a cleaning woman who had worked in this hospital for over a decade, who brought her daughter to work because the daycare was closed, who probably earned in a year what Jackie spent in a week on things nobody needed. And that woman's daughter had just saved his life, while his own wife had been trying to end it. There was a lesson in that, Harlan thought. He was not sure he was ready to learn it yet, but it was there waiting, like everything important always waits until you are broken enough to pay attention. 20 minutes later, Garrett brought Denise Harper to the consultation room on the 14th floor. Harlan was not there for that conversation. He was still in his bed, eyes closed, listening to the guard breathing near the window and the machines keeping their slow count. But Garrett told him about it afterward. Denise had been afraid. Not for herself, for Lily. She had walked into the room already apologizing, already assuming her daughter had done something wrong, already preparing to lose the job that was everything to her. "Whatever happens, sir, please," she had said. "She is a good girl. She doesn't make trouble." And Garrett had told her the truth. Her daughter had saved a man's life. Denise had cried, not in the way people cry on television with dramatic sobs and shaking shoulders. In the quiet, exhausted way that people cry when they have been holding everything together for so long that one kind word is enough to undo all of it. Lily had sat beside her mother and held her hand and said, "It's okay, Mama. I told the man." Harlan listened to Garrett describe all of this, and he felt something open inside his chest that had nothing to do with the surgery. There was one more thing that happened before the end of that first day. Garrett called Frank Shelton. Frank had been Harlan's head of personal security for 15 years before retiring 2 years ago. They had parted on good terms. Birthday calls, holiday messages, the kind of friendship that survives distance because it was built on something real. Harlan had asked Garrett to make the call because Harlan no longer trusted anyone else. Not his regular security team, not anyone whose loyalty had not been tested by time. Frank answered on the 4th ring. His voice was tired, older than Garrett remembered. Garrett told him what had happened. Frank was quiet for several seconds. Then he said, "I'll be there in 2 hours. Do not talk to anyone in your family about this." "What do you mean?" Garrett asked. I mean, do not tell your sister. Do not tell your brother. Do not tell your stepmother. Do not tell your father's lawyer. Not anyone. Do you understand me? I understand. And the child who caught it, where is she? At home with her mother. I have one man watching the house. One is not enough. I told you send 3. Move them tonight. My father already said the same thing. There was a pause on the line. Then Frank said very quietly, "Good. Your father always did think faster than everyone else in the room." The call ended. Garrett came back to the room and sat down in the chair beside the bed. The hospital was quieter now. The hallway lights had dimmed to their nighttime setting. The guard in the corner sat motionless like a man who had been paid to be furniture. Harlan opened his eyes. It was 4:12 in the morning. The room was nearly dark. The machines beeped their slow rhythm. The city outside the window was a scatter of distant lights, each one belonging to someone who was sleeping peacefully. Unaware that on the 12th floor of St. Catherine's Medical Center, an old man with a beard and a wired-together chest was staring at his son with eyes that were very much awake. "Garrett." His son leaned forward immediately. "Dad, how are you feeling?" Harlan ignored the question. It was her, wasn't it? He did not say it as a question. He said it the way you say something you have known for a long time but have never spoken out loud. The way a man says a thing he has been rehearsing in the dark. Garrett did not answer right away. He looked at his father, at the beard that had gone almost entirely white in the last 2 years, at the lines around his eyes that were deeper than they had been at the last family gathering, at the hands resting on the blanket that still looked strong enough to build something. "We don't know for certain yet," Garrett said carefully. Harlan shook his head once slowly. "I know," he said. And then, because he was Harlan Ashford, and because he had never in 71 years asked anyone else to carry a weight he could carry himself, he began to talk. He told Garrett about the phone calls, about the money, about the voice on the extension asking when she would be free, about the gardener they did not have, about the private investigator in the 9 weeks of surveillance and the man named Victor Dane. He told him about the report delivered 3 days before the surgery, about reading it alone in the study with the door closed and the desk lamp on and Margaret's chair sitting empty in the corner. He told him about the new will, about calling Arthur Whitfield and asking for the numbers to be changed, about the signing appointment scheduled for Monday, and he told him about the dinner, about being tired, about saying too much. "I told her I was updating some legal matters," Harlan said quietly. "I told her I wanted to make sure the right people were taken care of. I did not say her name. I did not say numbers. But she heard what I did not say, Garrett. She has always heard what I did not say." Garrett sat very still. "How long have you known?" he asked. "About Dane 3 months. About the rest of it, about her." Harlan looked at the ceiling. "Longer," he said. "Maybe from the beginning. But knowing something and admitting it are not the same thing. I think I knew the day I married her. I think some part of me understood exactly what was happening. But I was lonely, Garrett. I was so lonely after your mother died that I would have believed anything. I would have believed the moon was made of bread if someone said it in the right voice at the right time." He paused. "That is not an excuse. That is just the truth." Garrett leaned forward in his chair. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell any of us?" Harlan was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was ashamed," he said. "Because I am 71 years old, and I built a company worth $1 billion, and I could not see that the woman sleeping next to me was waiting for me to die." The word "die" sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Harlan reached out and took his son's hand. He held it the way he had held things his entire life, firmly, deliberately, like a man who understood that the things worth holding required effort. "But I am not dead," he said. "And the reason I am not dead is that a 9-year-old girl who carries towels in a hospital hallway was paying more attention to my life than my own wife was." He let go of Garrett's hand. "Now," he said, "tell me what happens next." Garrett looked at his father for a long time. Then he began to talk about Frank Shelton and the plan for the night, and the security arrangements, and the footage from the hospital cameras. But Harlan was only half listening. The other half of his mind was somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about Monday, about the will sitting unsigned in Arthur Whitfield's office, about the woman who had carried tulips into hospital rooms and poison into IV bags, about the man with the deep voice and the expensive apartment, and the debts that needed a billionaire's death to be paid off. And he was thinking about what he was going to do about all of it. Because Harlan Ashford was 71 years old, and he had wire in his chest, and a beard that had gone white, and hands that shook slightly when he was tired. But he was not finished. He was not finished at all. Frank Shelton arrived at St. Catherine's Medical Center at 9:47 that evening. He came through the main lobby wearing a dark coat and carrying a small leather bag, the kind a man packs when he does not know how many nights he will be away from home. His hair was more silver than black now. His shoulders were slightly narrower than Garrett remembered, but his eyes were the same, sharp, patient. The eyes of a man who had spent 30 years watching other people's faces for the thing they were trying not to show. Garrett met him at the elevator on the 12th floor. They did not shake hands. They did not exchange pleasantries. Frank looked at Garrett the way a mechanic looks at an engine that has started making a sound it should not be making, and he said one word. Where? Garrett led him to the small consultation room at the end of the corridor. It was a windowless room with a table, 4 chairs, and a lamp that gave off the kind of light that makes everyone look tired. A cup of cold coffee sat on the table. Garrett had not eaten since breakfast. He was running on adrenaline and something else, something that felt like the early stages of a fear he was not ready to name. They sat down. "Tell me everything," Frank said. "From the beginning. Don't skip details, especially the ones you think don't matter." Garrett told him. The girl in the hallway, the 2 puncture marks, the toxicology report, Denise Harper, Dr. Langford, the potassium chloride, the woman in fake nurse clothing who had entered through the service entrance and left by the stairs. Frank listened the way he always listened, eyes half closed, head slightly tilted, like a man hearing a piece of music he wanted to memorize note by note. When Garrett finished, Frank opened his eyes and asked one question. "Who benefits if your father dies tonight?" Garrett had been waiting for that question. He had also been avoiding it. "3 people benefit in obvious ways," he said slowly. "My sister Elaine, my brother Boyd, and Jackie." "How much?" "My father is worth approximately $1.7 billion. The current will, the one that's still in effect, gives Elaine and Boyd each 20%. Jackie gets 30%. I get 30%, plus controlling shares of Ashford Holdings." "Controlling shares to you," Frank said. "That's unusual." "My father is an old-fashioned man. I've been running operations for 14 years. He wanted continuity." Frank made a small note on a piece of paper he had pulled from his coat pocket. He wrote with a pencil, not a pen. Old habits. "Tell me about the sister." "About, Elaine. She lives in Vermont. She paints, landscapes mostly. She has a small gallery that barely breaks even. She doesn't talk to the family much. She came to the hospital once the day of the surgery, stayed for 2 hours, then drove back. She and my father have a complicated relationship. She thinks he never respected her choices. He thinks she never gave him a chance to." "Does she need money?" "She doesn't live expensively, but her gallery has been losing money for 3 years. I don't think she's desperate, but I don't know her finances the way I know the company's." Frank nodded. "And the brother?" Garrett paused. This was the part he had not wanted to reach. "Boyd is 38. He's the youngest. He has always been the youngest in every way that word means something beyond age. He's smart when he wants to be, which is not often enough. He had a gambling problem in his 20s. Poker mostly, online and in person. He went through treatment. My father paid for all of it. He's been clean for the last few years, or at least that's what he tells us. But," Garrett exhaled slowly, "about 6 weeks ago, I got a call from someone I know at a private club in the city. He told me Boyd had been there 3 times in the past month. High-stakes tables. He said Boyd was playing with money he probably didn't have." Frank set his pencil down. "How much does Boyd owe?" "I don't know exactly. My contact estimated somewhere around $2 million. The room was very quiet. "There's something else," Garrett said. "I found out from Arthur Whitfield's assistant, not Arthur himself, that Boyd called Arthur's office twice in the past month. He was asking questions about the estate, about how inheritance works when a will is contested, about timelines." Frank looked at him for a long moment. "Your brother called your father's lawyer to ask about inheritance timelines," he repeated. 6 weeks before someone tried to kill your father." "Yes." "And he has gambling debts he can't cover." "Yes." And he would inherit 20% of $1.7 billion if your father died under the current will. That's $340 million. Yes. Frank picked up his pencil again and drew a small circle on his paper. He stared at it. I am not saying it was Boyd, Garrett said quickly. I don't believe my brother would do this. He's reckless. He's irresponsible. But he is not a murderer. People who are $2 million in debt to the kind of men who run high-stakes poker tables are not in a position to be anything they used to be, Frank said quietly. Debt changes people, Garrett. It rewires them. It makes the unthinkable feel like the only option. Garrett stared at the table. He thought about Boyd at age 12 building a treehouse in the backyard of the Connecticut house. He thought about Boyd at 16 laughing so hard at Thanksgiving that milk came out of his nose. He thought about Boyd at 24 sitting in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, shaking, telling Garrett he had lost $80,000 in a single night and didn't know how to tell their father. He thought about all the versions of his brother he had known, and he tried to place any of them in a room with a woman in a stolen nurse's uniform, handing her an envelope of cash and saying, make sure it's slow. It has to look like the heart. He could not. But Frank was right. Debt changes people. We investigate everyone, Frank said as if reading his thoughts, including the people you don't want to investigate, including the people you trust, especially them. Because the worst betrayals don't come from enemies, Garrett. They come from the people who sit at your dinner table. Garrett nodded slowly. Now, Frank said, let's go see your father. They walked down the corridor together. The hospital was quieter at this hour. Most of the patients were asleep behind their closed doors. The nurses' station was staffed by 2 women working under low lamps, their faces lit blue by computer screens. Garrett's private security stood at the door of room 1234, dressed in plain dark suits that could have belonged to anyone. Frank paused at the door and looked at the guards. He studied their positions, the angle of their sight lines, the distance to the elevator and the stairwell. He made no comment, but Garrett could see him making calculations. They went inside. Harlan was awake. He was sitting up slightly, the head of the bed raised a few inches, a glass of water on the table beside him. His beard looked whiter against the pillow. His eyes looked darker above it. He looked like a man who had not slept, not because he could not, but because he had decided not to. Frank stopped at the foot of the bed. The 2 men looked at each other for a long moment. They had known each other for almost 20 years. Frank had been at Harlan's side during board disputes, shareholder revolts, a kidnapping threat that never became public, and the long, terrible months of Margaret's illness. He had stood outside hospital rooms and boardrooms and courtrooms. He had been paid to protect Harlan Ashford's body, but somewhere along the way, he had also become one of the few people Harlan trusted with the things that mattered more than his body. You look terrible, Frank said. I almost died today, Harlan said. What's your excuse? Frank almost smiled. Almost. He pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. He did not take out his notebook. He did not ask questions. He simply looked at Harlan and waited the way a man waits when he knows the other person has something to say and needs the space to say it. Harlan told him, not the short version he had given Garrett, the full version. The version that started a year ago with a phone call overheard on a house extension and ended 3 days ago with a private investigator's report sitting on a desk in a locked study. He told Frank about Victor Dane, about the hotel receipts and the phone records and the charity meetings that never existed, about the new will and the signing date and the 3-week-old dinner conversation that may have set everything in motion. He told him about the shame. That was the hardest part. Not the facts, the feelings. I knew, Harlan said. Some part of me always knew. But I married her anyway, Frank. I married her because I was lonely and because she made me feel like I still mattered. Like I was still the kind of man a woman would choose. Not for the money. For me. He paused. But it was never for me. It was always for the money. And I think I knew that on the day I signed the marriage certificate, and I think I have known it every day since. And I chose to keep not knowing because the alternative was too painful. Frank was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Harlan, I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it without getting defensive. I stopped getting defensive about 12 hours ago. The most likely person behind this is someone close to you. Not because she is the most evil person in the room, but because she had the most access. She knew your medical schedule. She knew which hospital, which floor, which room. She knew when your son would be stepping out. She probably knew which nurse came at which hour and which entrance was least watched. Someone fed that information to whoever walked into your room today. Someone with eyes inside your life. You think it was Jackie. I don't think anything yet. I think we have to look at everyone, including Boyd. Harlan's eyes sharpened. Boyd. Frank glanced at Garrett. Garrett nodded once. Your son has gambling debts, Frank said. Significant ones. He called your lawyer's office twice in the past month asking about inheritance procedures. I'm not saying he did this. I'm saying we have to look. Harlan was quiet for a very long time. The machines beeped. The guard in the corner did not move. The city outside the window glowed in its distant, indifferent way. Boyd is not a killer, Harlan said finally. His voice was rough but certain. He is weak. He is foolish. He has made more mistakes in 38 years than most men make in a lifetime. But he is not capable of this. People with $2 million in gambling debts are capable of things they would never have imagined before the debt, Frank said. I know my son. You thought you knew your wife too. The words landed like a stone in still water. Harlan closed his eyes. His hand moved to his beard. He stroked it slowly, the familiar motion that had carried him through 1,000 difficult decisions over 5 decades. Investigate him, Harlan said quietly. Investigate all of them. But Frank, yes. When you find out it wasn't Boyd, and you will find out it wasn't Boyd, I want to know immediately. Because that boy is going to carry enough shame in his life without me adding suspicion to it. Frank nodded. Now, Harlan said. The lawyer. Tonight, right now, I don't care if Arthur Whitfield is asleep. I don't care if he's in his bathrobe eating crackers. We go to his house. We do not call ahead. We do not give him time to make any phone calls before we arrive. Frank stood up. He looked at Garrett. I'll drive, Frank said. Garrett hesitated. He looked at his father. Go, Harlan said. Arthur won't talk freely on the phone. He's too careful for that. You need to be sitting in front of him. Look at his face when you ask the questions. I taught you that 20 years ago. A man's face tells you more than his mouth ever will. Garrett leaned down and put his hand on his father's shoulder. He held it there for a moment, not squeezing, just resting it. The kind of touch that says, I am here, without needing the words. Then he and Frank left. Harlan lay in the dark room and listened to their footsteps fade down the corridor. He was alone now. Alone with the guard and the machines and the slow drip of the new IV bag, the clean one. The one that contained only what it was supposed to contain. He looked at it. A clear plastic bag hanging from a metal pole. Such a simple thing. Such an ordinary object. Thousands of them hung in thousands of rooms across this hospital, doing exactly what they were designed to do, keeping people alive one drop at a time. And someone had turned one of them into a weapon. Harlan thought about the girl again. Lily. He had not met her yet. He had only heard her voice through the closed door, small and steady and serious. But he thought about her the way you think about a stranger who pulls you from a burning building. You do not know their name. You do not know their story. But they become part of yours in a way that nothing can undo, a cleaning woman's daughter. He thought about Denise Harper, a woman he had never met, working the night shift and the day shift and whatever shift they gave her, bringing her child to work. Because there was nobody else to watch her cleaning floors that billionaires walked on without looking down. And that woman's child had been the only person in the entire building who noticed that something was wrong. Not the nurses, not the doctors, not the security team, not the administrators. A girl with an armful of towels. Harlan closed his eyes and felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Not gratitude. Something deeper than gratitude. The feeling you get when you realize that the world is arranged differently than you thought it was. That the important people are not always the people with titles and offices and signatures on contracts. That sometimes the most important person in the building is the one nobody sees. He had spent 50 years in boardrooms making decisions that affected thousands of people. He had hired and fired and built and broken. He had been called a genius and a titan and a visionary by magazines that put his face on their covers. And none of that had saved his life today. A 9-year-old girl had saved his life because she was paying attention, because her mother had taught her to look at badges, because she had the courage to speak to a stranger in a hallway and say 5 words that did not sound important, but were the most important words anyone had ever said to anyone in that building on that day. Check your father's AV bag. Harlan Ashford fell asleep for the first time in 4 days, and when he slept, he dreamed about a hardware store on the east side of Detroit with sawdust on the floor and his first wife standing in the doorway smiling at him in the morning light. 40 minutes later, Garrett and Frank were standing on the front porch of a large brick house in a quiet neighborhood outside the city. The house was set back from the street behind a row of old maple trees. The front lawn was neat. A single lamp was on in the downstairs window. Through the curtains, they could see the blue flicker of a television. Garrett rang the doorbell. A dog barked inside. Small, irritated. The kind of bark that belonged to a dog that had been asleep and did not appreciate being woken. The door opened. Arthur Whitfield was 72 years old. He had thin white hair combed carefully across the top of his head. He wore reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and a cardigan over a button-down shirt. He looked like a man who had been settled into his evening and was not expecting it to be interrupted. When he saw Garrett, his face changed. Surprise first, then alarm. "Garrett, is everything all right? Is it your father?" "He's alive," Garrett said. "May we come in?" Arthur looked at Frank, then back at Garrett, then stepped aside without another question. He led them through a hallway lined with framed family photographs, past a living room where the television was playing a baseball game, to an empty couch, and into a small study at the back of the house. He closed the door. The study was warm and dark. Bookshelves lined two walls. A desk sat near the window with a green lamp and a stack of papers held down by a glass paperweight. The room smelled like old leather and something faintly sweet that might have been pipe tobacco from years ago. Arthur sat behind the desk. Garrett and Frank took the two leather chairs across from him. "Tell me what happened," Arthur said. Garrett told him a shortened version. The IV bag, the girl, the toxicology report, the potassium chloride. He did not mention Jackie by name. He did not mention anyone's name except his father's. When he finished, Arthur Whitfield was very pale. "Dear God," he whispered. "I need to know about the will," Garrett said. "The current version, not the one I think I know about, the actual current version." Arthur hesitated. His hands were folded on the desk. Garrett could see the knuckles tightening. "Garrett, attorney-client privilege does not just go away because of the circumstances. Your father is my client. His wishes are protected by law. My father almost died today, Arthur. If he had died, you would be reading that will tomorrow. I am asking you to tell me tonight what you would have told all of us tomorrow if a 9-year-old girl had not been standing in a hallway with an armful of towels." Arthur looked at him for a long time. Then he looked at Frank. Frank said nothing. He simply sat in the chair with his hands on his knees watching. Arthur took off his reading glasses and set them on the desk. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. Then he put the glasses back on and spoke. "Your father came to see me 11 weeks ago, alone. He asked me to draft a new will." The room went very still. "The new will has not been signed yet. It was scheduled to be signed Monday. The appointment is on my calendar." "What does the new will say?" Arthur exhaled slowly. "In the new will, Jacqueline receives a structured settlement of $3 million. She retains the right to live in the Connecticut property for the remainder of her life, and nothing else." Garrett felt the room tilt slightly. Not physically, but something shifted in the air the way air shifts before a storm. "In the current will, she receives 30%, Garrett said. "Yes." "Which is approximately $500 million. "Yes." "And in the new will, she receives $3 million. "Yes." "Did she know about the new will?" "No one knew. Your father was very specific. He asked me to tell no one until the signing." Garrett looked at Frank. Frank was already writing in his small notebook. "Arthur," Garrett said, "the new will was scheduled to be signed Monday. Today is Thursday. If my father had died before Monday, which will would have been executed? The current one, the one that gives her 30%. So if someone wanted to prevent the new will from ever being signed, the simplest way to do that would be to make sure my father did not live until Monday." Arthur stared at him. "Yes," he said quietly, "that would be the simplest way." The drive back to the hospital was quiet for the first 10 minutes. The road was dark. Street lights passed the windows in a slow, rhythmic procession. Frank kept his eyes on the road. Garrett kept his eyes on his hands, which were folded in his lap, like he had forgotten what they were for. 11 weeks, Garrett said finally. 3 months. Whatever my father saw, whatever he decided, it was 3 months ago. And someone found out, Frank said. Or someone figured out he was about to change things. Either way, it gave them a deadline. The new will was supposed to be signed Monday. They needed your father to die before Monday. Why the hospital? It's more dangerous here. Cameras, staff, records. Because in the hospital, a death looks like a complication. At home, it looks like a crime. The hospital is the safest place to kill someone recovering from heart surgery, if you have access to the right person inside. Garrett thought about that. The woman without the badge, the fake nurse, she was probably never a hospital employee at all. Probably not. A person hired for one task on one day. She walked in through a staff entrance wearing a uniform that was close enough. She knew which room. She knew when your father would be alone. She knew which drug to use and how to administer it. Someone gave her every piece of that information. Someone who had been inside the room before. Someone who had been inside your father's life. Garrett stared at the road ahead. Frank, what if it isn't Jackie? Frank did not answer for a moment. Then we will find out it isn't Jackie, he said. But the fact that the new will cuts her from 500 million to 3 million is not a small detail. 500 million is not a small detail. People have done much worse for much less. My father loved her. Frank glanced at him briefly, then back at the road. Your father wanted to love her, he said gently. That is not the same thing. They reached the hospital just after 11. The lobby was nearly empty. Two of Garrett's security men stood near the elevators. They nodded as he passed. On the 12th floor, the corridor was dim and quiet. The night shift nurses worked under low lamps. The guards stood at the door of 1234 like men who had been carved from stone. Dr. Langford was waiting for them in the consultation room. We have something, he said. He turned a laptop on the table so they could see the screen. The surveillance team had been working for hours pulling footage from every camera in the hospital. The woman entered at 1:18 this afternoon through the service entrance on the south side of the building. She was wearing standard nurse scrubs, no badge. She walked directly to the 12th floor using the service stairwell. She entered room 1217 at 1:23 and remained inside for approximately 7 minutes. She exited at 1:30 and left the building through the same stairwell. She never passed the nurse's station. She never interacted with any staff member. Frank leaned forward. She knew the layout, he said. She knew exactly where the cameras were and how to minimize her exposure. This was rehearsed. Yes, Dr. Langford said. And there is something else. He clicked to another image. This was taken 8 days ago in the cardiac surgery consultation suite. Your father came in for his pre-operative meeting. His wife accompanied him. The image showed Harlan Ashford sitting in a waiting room chair, his hand resting on Jackie's. They were talking quietly. Jackie was smiling at him. It was the kind of photograph that in any other context would have looked like love. Now look at the woman behind them, Dr. Langford said. He zoomed in. 2 rows back, a woman sat alone. She was pretending to read a magazine. Light brown hair pulled back, a small mole on her right cheek. She was not looking at the magazine. She was looking at Harlan Ashford. Garrett stared at the screen. It's her, he said. The same woman. Yes, Dr. Langford said. The woman who injected your father's IV bag was sitting 6 feet behind him 8 days earlier, studying him, learning his face, his habits, how he walked, who came with him. Someone sent her to prepare. And Jackie was right there, Garrett said quietly. Yes, she was. Frank stood up from the table. I need a copy of everything, he said. Every frame, every angle, the entry footage, the corridor footage, the waiting room footage. I need a timeline of every person who entered and exited the 12th floor today between noon and 3 p.m. And I need the employment records of every nurse aide and support staff member assigned to this floor for the past 30 days. Dr. Langford hesitated. Mr. Shelton, that is a significant amount of confidential data. Dr. Langford, Frank said, and his voice had the quiet, flat quality of a man who was not going to ask twice. Someone walked into this hospital today and put execution drugs into a patient's IV bag. Your cameras did not stop her. Your badge system did not stop her. Your nurses did not notice her. Your entire security infrastructure failed. The only thing that prevented a murder was a 9-year-old child carrying towels. I am asking for the data because we both know that the police investigation will take weeks, and whoever did this may try again before the police finish their paperwork. Dr. Langford looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded. I will have it sent to you within the hour. Garrett went back to his father's room. It was nearly midnight. Harlan was awake. Of course he was awake. He was sitting up slightly in the dim room, his hands resting on the blanket, his beard casting a small shadow on his chest in the low light from the machines. Garrett sat down in the chair beside the bed and told him everything. The visit to Arthur, the new will, the timeline, the camera footage showing the same woman 8 days earlier sitting behind Jackie in the waiting room. Harlan listened without interrupting. When Garrett finished, Harlan was quiet for a long time. 8 days, he said finally. She was watching me for 8 days, learning my schedule, learning the room, learning when I would be alone. Yes. And Jackie was sitting right next to me the whole time. Yes. Harlan stroked his beard. His eyes were fixed on some point in the middle distance that only he could see. Garrett, I need to tell you something about your brother. Garrett stiffened slightly. I know about Boyd's debts, Harlan said. I have known for about 2 months. The club manager called me directly. We have a history. He told me Boyd had been coming back. He told me the amounts. Why didn't you say anything? Because I was already dealing with one betrayal. I did not have the strength for 2, and because Boyd's weakness is not the same as Jackie's. Your brother gambles because he is afraid. He has always been afraid. Afraid he cannot live up to this family. Afraid he is the one who does not belong at the table. He gambles because losing money is easier than facing the thing he is really afraid of losing. Harlan paused. Boyd did not do this, Garrett. He called Arthur's office because he is terrified. Terrified of his debts. Terrified of what happens when the men he owes come to collect. He was trying to find out if there was a way to access his inheritance early. That is not a murder plot. That is a drowning man looking for a rope. How can you be so sure? Because I know the difference between a man who is desperate and a man who is capable of killing. I have met both kinds in my life. Your brother is the first kind. He has always been the first kind. Garrett looked at his father. He saw something in the old man's eyes that he had not expected to see. Not certainty, sadness. The deep, worn-down sadness of a father who knows exactly what his children are and loves them anyway, especially for the parts that are broken. Frank thinks we should investigate him, Garrett said. Let Frank investigate. He should. But when the investigation is finished, and it will show what I already know, I want to be the one who talks to Boyd. Not Frank, not a detective. Me. Garrett nodded. The room was quiet again. Then Harlan said something that made Garrett straighten in his chair. I want Jackie to come tomorrow. What? Tomorrow morning. I want her to come to this room. I want her to sit in that chair and hold my hand and ask the doctor her questions and bring her flowers and do everything she always does. Dad, that is insane. She tried to have you killed. We believe she tried to have me killed. We are probably right. But I have been lying in this bed for 4 days. Garrett and I have been thinking about one thing. I have been thinking about the moment I look into her eyes, knowing what I know now. I have been thinking about what I will see in her face when she sits beside me and performs the role of the worried wife while the man she is worried about already knows every line of the script. Garrett shook his head. The police will be ready by morning. Detective Marsh said he can have people here. We can arrange for them to be in the room when she arrives. Good. Then arrange it. Let her come. Let her sit. Let her perform. And when she is finished performing, let the detective do his job. Why go through that? Why not just have them pick her up at home? Harlan looked at his son with eyes that were older than 71 years. Because I earned it, he said quietly. I earned the right to see who I married. Not who she pretended to be, who she actually is. I want to watch her walk into this room one last time, and I want to see the truth on her face, and I want her to know that I saw it. That is not revenge, Garrett. That is something an old man needs before he can let go. Garrett stared at his father. He saw the man who had poured concrete in Detroit, the man who had signed contracts with grease under his fingernails, the man who had built an empire and buried a wife and married another and been betrayed by her and nearly killed by her, and was now lying in a hospital bed with wire in his chest asking for one thing. One look. One honest look at the woman who had pretended to love him for 6 years. Garrett wanted to argue. He wanted to say it was too dangerous, too emotional, too risky. He wanted to protect his father the way his father had spent a lifetime protecting everyone else. But he saw the look in Harlan's eyes and he understood that this was not a request. It was a decision, made by a man who had been making decisions for 50 years and was not about to stop now because his heart had been broken in more ways than one. "All right," Garrett said. "I'll arrange it. Thank you. Is there anything else you need tonight?" Harlan shook his head slowly. "Just the quiet," he said, "and the time to think." Garrett stood. He looked at his father one more time. Then he walked to the door. "Garrett," he stopped. "The girl, Lily, and her mother, are they safe?" "3 men, hotel, cash, no real names." "Good. Dad?" "Yes. We're going to get through this." Harlan looked at his son and almost smiled. "Almost." "We already are," he said. Garrett left. The door closed softly behind him. Harlan Ashford lay in the dark room and listened to the machines count his heartbeats. He thought about tomorrow morning, about Jackie walking through the door with flowers and concern, and the practiced warmth of a woman who had turned deception into a second language. He thought about what he would see in her eyes. He thought about what she would see in his. And then he thought about Monday, the will sitting unsigned on Arthur Whitfield's desk, the appointment on the calendar, the document that would reduce Jackie's inheritance from $500 million to $3 million. If he could stay alive until Monday, the will would be signed. The money would be redirected. The plan, whatever it was, would fail. 3 more days. He just had to stay alive for 3 more days. Harlan stroked his beard in the dark. Outside the window, the city was a scattered constellation of lights. Each one belonged to someone who was sleeping peacefully, dreaming ordinary dreams, unaware that on the 12th floor of St. Catherine's Medical Center, a 71-year-old man with surgical wire in his chest was doing what he had done his entire life. Planning, calculating, refusing to be finished. His phone buzzed on the bedside table. He picked it up. The screen glowed in the dark room. A text from a number he knew but had not seen light up his phone in weeks. "Jackie. Thinking of you tonight. I love you. Sleep well." Harlan read the message 3 times. Then he set the phone face down on the table and closed his eyes. He did not sleep for a long time. But when he finally did just before dawn, when the first gray light began to press against the edges of the curtains, he dreamed about the stone house in Connecticut on a Sunday morning in autumn. Margaret was sitting on the wooden bench beneath the oak tree, a book open in her lap, the light turning her hair the color of copper. She looked up at him as he walked across the lawn, and she did not say anything. She did not need to. She simply moved over on the bench, making room for him the way she had always made room. In the dream, Harlan sat down beside her. And for the first time in 4 days, the weight in his chest was not from the wire. It was from something much older and much gentler. It was from being exactly where he belonged. Jackie arrived at the hospital at 10:15 the next morning. Harlan knew the exact time because he had been watching the clock on the wall since 6 a.m., the way a man watches a clock when he knows that something is coming and has decided not to look away from it. He had asked the nurse to raise the bed a few inches so he could sit up properly. He had asked for a glass of water. He had combed his beard with his fingers slowly, carefully, the way he used to comb it before board meetings in the old days, when appearance was a kind of armor and every detail mattered. He was not dressing for his wife. He was preparing for a performance, his own. Garrett had arrived at 8:30. He had spoken quietly with the 2 guards outside the door. He had made 3 phone calls in the corridor, each one shorter than the last. Then he had come inside and sat in the chair near the window, the chair that faced the door, the chair from which he could see everything without being the first thing anyone saw when they walked in. Detective Marsh had called at 9:15. "We'll have 2 plainclothes officers in the hospital," Marsh said. "They won't be in the room when she arrives. They'll be down the hall. When you give the word, they come in." "How do I give the word?" Garrett asked. "You step out of the room. That's the signal. You walk into the hallway, and the officers will see you. They'll be there within 30 seconds. And if something goes wrong before that, your father's guards are inside. Nothing will go wrong." Garrett had not found that entirely reassuring, but he had agreed. Now they waited. Harlan looked at the door, then he looked at his son. "Garrett, yes. When she comes in, I don't want you to say anything. Not a word. Let her talk. Let her do what she does. Watch her. But don't speak." "Why?" "Because if you speak, she will look at you, and I need her looking at me." Garrett studied his father's face. The beard, the lines, the eyes that had seen more in 71 years than most men see in 100. There was something in those eyes this morning that Garrett had not seen before. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter than both. Something that looked like clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a man stops pretending. "All right," Garrett said. "I won't say a word." They waited. At 10:14, Garrett's phone vibrated. A text from one of the lobby guards. "She's in the elevator." Garrett showed the screen to his father. Harlan nodded once. He placed his hands on the blanket. He straightened the collar of his hospital gown. He took one slow breath and let it out through his nose. Then he arranged his face. It was remarkable, really. In the space of a single breath, Harlan Ashford transformed himself from a man who knew his wife had tried to kill him into a man who was simply glad to see her. The tension left his shoulders. The sharpness left his eyes. His mouth softened into the kind of half-smile that a tired old man gives the person he has been waiting for. Garrett watched this happen and felt something cold move through his chest. Not because his father was lying, because his father was so good at it. Because in that moment, Garrett understood that Harlan Ashford had not built a billion-dollar company just by working harder than everyone else. He had built it by knowing how to control exactly what other people saw when they looked at him. The door opened. Jackie walked in. She was wearing a soft gray sweater and a long camel-colored coat that fell just below her knees. Her hair was pulled back into a low, elegant knot at the base of her neck. She carried a small bouquet of white tulips in her left hand. Her eyes were slightly red at the edges, as if she had been crying in the car on the way over, or as if she had applied something that made it look like she had. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like. A worried wife visiting her recovering husband. "Harlan," she said softly. "Oh, Harlan." She crossed the room quickly. She bent down and kissed his forehead. Her lips were cool. Her perfume was the same one she always wore, something with jasmine and something with vanilla, and something underneath both that Harlan had never been able to identify. He had once found it intoxicating. Now it smelled like a lie that had been sprayed from a bottle. "How are you feeling?" she asked, pulling the chair close to the bed and sitting down. She took his hand in both of hers. Her fingers were warm and steady. She placed the tulips on the small table beside the water glass. "I have been so worried. I barely slept. Garrett wouldn't tell me anything last night, and I almost drove down here at midnight, but he said the doctors wanted you undisturbed." "I've been sleeping," Harlan said. His voice was calm, warm, husbandly. "There hasn't been much to tell." "Well, you look better than I expected." She squeezed his hand. "You have more color today. That's a good sign, isn't it? When can I talk to the doctor? I have some questions about the medication schedule." I wrote them down. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small notepad. She had written questions on it in neat handwriting. 3 pages of questions. She had prepared for this visit the way she prepared for everything, thoroughly carefully, with attention to the details that would make her performance convincing. Harlan looked at the notepad. He thought about the other notepad that existed somewhere. The one that nobody had written questions on. The one that contained different information entirely. Hotel names, phone numbers, amounts transferred, a timeline of betrayal that stretched back more than 2 years. But he said none of that. "The doctor should be in shortly," he said. "He usually rounds at about 10:30. "Good. I want to make sure they're managing the blood thinners correctly. I read that after cardiac surgery, the balance is very delicate. Too much and you risk bleeding. Too little and you risk clotting." She said this with the confidence of a woman who had been a nurse. Because she had been a nurse. She knew exactly how medications worked. She knew exactly what potassium chloride did to a heart that had just been operated on. She knew all of it. Harlan looked at her. He looked at her the way he had looked at the blueprints for his first warehouse in 1987 when the architect had drawn a load-bearing wall in the wrong place, and Harlan had stared at the plans for 20 minutes before finding the error. He looked at her the way you look at something when you are searching for the flaw. The one detail that does not fit. The one line that is slightly off-center. He found it in her eyes. They were perfect. That was the problem. They were too perfect. They showed exactly the right amount of concern, exactly the right amount of love, exactly the right amount of exhaustion. Like a portrait painted by someone who understood the mathematics of emotion, but not the feeling itself. Jackie had always been beautiful. That had been part of it. The way her face moved when she listened to you. The way her eyes softened when she said your name. It was convincing in the way that expensive things are convincing. You believed it because it looked like it cost something real. But sitting here now holding her hand, Harlan could see through it the way you see through a window that someone forgot to frost. There was nothing behind her eyes, nothing except calculation. She was measuring him, measuring the room, measuring the distance between what she knew and what he might know. Running the numbers the way Harlan himself ran numbers quickly, quietly behind a face that showed nothing. The doctor came in at 10:32. Dr. Holbrook, a tall man with thin-rimmed glasses and the careful, practiced manner of a man who had delivered good news and bad news so many times that both sounded the same. Mrs. Ashford, he said, good to see you. Your husband is making excellent progress. The surgical site is healing well. His blood pressure has stabilized. We're very pleased with where he is. Jackie asked her questions, all 3 pages of them. She nodded at the answers. She asked follow-up questions. She used medical terminology correctly. She mentioned the blood thinners and the clotting risk and the medication schedule, and Dr. Holbrook looked impressed the way doctors look impressed when a family member has done their homework. Harlan watched her the entire time. He watched her write notes on her little pad. He watched her squeeze his hand at exactly the right moments. At the mention of recovery time, she squeezed once. At the mention of potential complications, she squeezed twice, and her eyes went slightly glassy as if she were holding back tears. At one point, she pulled a tissue from her purse and pressed it briefly to the corner of her right eye. Just the right eye. Just for a moment. Just enough to suggest that she was struggling to keep herself together. It was the single greatest performance Harlan had ever seen. And he had sat through 40 years of boardroom presentations by men who were paid millions to be convincing. The doctor left. Jackie turned back to Harlan. She was still holding his hand. I feel so much better now, she said. He sounds very confident. I think you're going to be home sooner than we expected. I hope so, Harlan said. I miss the house. The house misses you. Mrs. Brennan has been cooking enough food for 6 people every night, even though it's just me there. I think she does it to keep busy. She worries about you, you know. She won't say it, but she worries. She always has. Harlan, yes. I want you to know that I'm going to be here every day until you come home. Every single day. Whatever you need. I'll bring your books. I'll bring your records. I'll bring whatever you want from the study. Just tell me, and I'll bring it. He looked at her face. He saw the mask. He saw beneath the mask the woman who had sat across from Victor Dane in hotel rooms and planned the end of his life. He saw the woman who had received a phone call from someone with a deep voice saying it was done, or almost done, or would be done soon. He saw the woman who had carried tulips into a hospital room, knowing that the man in the bed was supposed to be dead by now. He saw all of it. And for one moment, just one, he let himself feel the weight of it. The full, crushing, unbearable weight of loving someone who was waiting for you to die. Then he let it go. He had carried it long enough. Jackie, he said. His voice was gentle, almost tender. Thank you for being here. She smiled. It was a beautiful smile. It always had been. Where else would I be, she said. Garrett stood up from the chair by the window. He did not say a word. He walked to the door, opened it, and stepped into the hallway. Jackie did not notice. She was looking at Harlan. She was holding his hand. She was being the wife. 23 seconds later, the door opened again. 2 men walked in. They were dressed in plain clothes, dark slacks, button-down shirts without ties. One was shorter with a square jaw and calm gray eyes. The other was taller with the broad shoulders of a man who had spent years doing a job that occasionally required physical authority. The shorter one spoke. Mrs. Ashford. Jackie looked up. Her hand was still on Harlan's. I am Detective Marsh with the City Police Department. This is Detective Holt. We need you to come with us. There are some questions we need to ask you regarding an incident at this hospital yesterday afternoon. For 1 second, something happened to Jackie's face. 1 second. That was all. Her eyes moved, not her head, just her eyes. They moved from Detective Marsh to Garrett, who was standing in the doorway behind the officers. Then to Harlan, then back to Marsh. The movement took less than a heartbeat, but in that heartbeat, Harlan saw something he had never seen on her face before. Calculation without cover. Raw, undisguised arithmetic. How much do they know? What have they found? What can I still deny? How far can I still run? It lasted 1 second. Then the mask came back, smooth and seamless like a door closing. I'm sorry, Jackie said. Her voice was confused, innocent. A woman interrupted during a tender moment with her recovering husband. An incident. What kind of incident? We'll discuss it at the station, ma'am, Marsh said. You are not under arrest at this time. We simply need your cooperation. Jackie looked at Harlan. Her hand tightened on his. Harlan, she said. Her voice trembled. It was a very convincing tremble, the kind of tremble that had probably taken years to perfect. I don't understand what's happening. Harlan looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. He was 71 years old. He had built a company from sawdust and sweat. He had buried the woman he loved and married the woman he needed. He had been wrong about the second one. He had known he was wrong and had chosen to keep being wrong because the truth was a room he did not want to enter. But he was in that room now, and he was not leaving. Jackie, he said quietly, go with them, please. Something shifted in her face, a hairline crack in the porcelain. Harlan, please. Whatever they think happened, I have nothing to do with it. You know me. You know who I am. I do, Harlan said. That is why I am asking you to go. She stared at him. The crack widened, and then in a voice that was different from any voice Harlan had ever heard her use, smaller and harder and much older than 41, she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. You don't know what it was like to wait. The words hung in the air. Wait. Such a simple word. 4 letters. But in her mouth it contained everything. The years of sitting in a large house with an old man who went to bed at 9 p.m. and woke at 5 a.m. and read books in a study that smelled like leather and age. The years of watching wealth move around her like weather while she held a position in the household that was somewhere between wife and decoration. The years of feeling her youth thin away in rooms that were too big and too quiet and too full of a dead woman's memory. Harlan heard all of it, and he answered. I know what it was like, he said. His voice was rough, low, the voice of a man speaking from a place that had no performance left in it. I waited 3 months. 3 months after I found out about Victor. 3 months after I read the report and saw the photographs and learned everything you thought I would never learn. I waited to see if you would stop on your own, if something in you would choose differently, if the woman I married was still in there somewhere. He paused. You didn't stop. You chose differently, Jackie. You chose a way out that required me to stop breathing. Jackie's face was white. Her hand slipped off his. She stood up slowly. She picked up her purse from the back of the chair. She straightened her coat. She looked at the white tulips on the bedside table, the flowers she had carried in with such care, the prop from a play that had just closed. She did not look at Harlan again. She walked out of the room between the 2 detectives. Her heels clicked softly on the hospital floor, growing fainter with each step until they disappeared entirely. The door closed. The room was very quiet. Harlan lay back against the pillow. He stared at the ceiling. The machines beeped. The guard in the corner sat motionless. Garrett stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame, watching his father, the way you watch a man who has just set down something impossibly heavy and is still feeling the absence of the weight. A single tear moved slowly down the side of Harlan's face. It traveled along the groove beside his nose and disappeared into the white hair of his beard. He did not wipe it away. He let it go where it needed to go. By that afternoon, the chain began to unravel. Detective Marsh called Garrett at 3:47 p.m. Jackie had been taken to the station and placed in an interview room. She had asked for a lawyer. She had not spoken another word. The lawyer arrived at 2:30, and after 40 minutes of conversation behind closed doors, Jackie still had not spoken. But they did not need her to speak, because Claire Dunning had already spoken enough for everyone. The fake nurse had been identified through the hospital's facial recognition system and tracked to a motel on the eastern edge of the city, a place called the Starlight Motor Lodge, the kind of motel that rented rooms by the hour and did not look too carefully at the names in the register. 2 officers had arrived at the motel at 1:15 p.m. They found Claire Dunning in room 14 sitting on the edge of the bed, watching television, eating a sandwich from a gas station. She was not expecting them. She had believed the job was done. She had believed that by now Harlan Ashford was dead and nobody was looking for anyone. She was wrong about both. Claire Dunning was 34 years old. She had been a medical assistant at a clinic in Ohio until she was fired for stealing controlled substances from the medication cabinet. She had a record, small things, petty theft, a DUI, forged prescriptions. She was the kind of person who existed on the edges of systems, never quite inside, never quite caught. Someone had found her. Someone had offered her $25,000 in cash to walk into a hospital wearing scrubs she had bought from a uniform supply store, carry a prepared syringe, inject it into an IV bag, and leave. She had done exactly that. And when the officers placed her in the interview room and told her what the charge would be, attempted murder first degree, her composure collapsed like a building with no foundation. She gave up everything within an hour. The syringe had been prepared by someone else. She did not know who. She had received it in a padded envelope left at a locker in a bus station. The key to the locker had been mailed to her apartment 3 weeks earlier with a typed note that said, "Only wait for instructions." The instructions came by phone. A man's voice, deep, controlled. He told her which hospital, which floor, which room, which entrance to use, which stairwell to take. He told her what time the patient's son usually stepped out. He told her the window would be approximately 7 minutes. He told her to make sure it was slow. It has to look like the heart. She had asked only one question: when do I get paid? He told her half before, half after. She had already received $12,500 in cash delivered to her apartment in a manila envelope by a man she had never seen before and would not recognize. Detective Marsh asked her if she knew the name of the man on the phone. She did not, but she had the phone number. She had saved it because she was the kind of person who saved things just in case. Just in case she needed leverage. Just in case someone tried to cheat her. The phone number belonged to a prepaid phone purchased at a convenience store in Hartford, Connecticut 6 weeks earlier. But the cell tower data showed that the phone had been used primarily in one area. The financial district, within 3 blocks of an apartment building on West 67th Street. Victor Dane's apartment. Victor Dane was arrested at 6:42 that evening. When the officers arrived, he was packing a suitcase. 2 suitcases, in fact, one for clothes and one for documents. His passport was on the bed. A one-way ticket to Lisbon sat in the printer tray printed 20 minutes before the knock on the door. He had been planning to run. He did not get far. A third arrest came the following morning. A driver named Russell Kemp, who had served as the intermediary, picking up envelopes of cash from a coffee shop drop point and delivering them to Claire Dunning's apartment. He was a small man with a small role, a connector between the money and the weapon, and he gave up his piece of the story before his lawyer even arrived. The chain was short. The chain was clear. Victor Dane had designed the plan. Jackie had provided the information, the hospital, the room, the schedule, the access points, the timing. Claire Dunning had been the hand. Russell Kemp had been the courier. 4 people, 1 target, and the whole thing had been stopped by a child who noticed that a nurse was not wearing a badge. Boyd Ashford arrived at the hospital the following week, 7 days after Jackie's arrest. Harlan was sitting up in bed reading a book when the door opened and his youngest son walked in. Boyd was wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans that looked like he had slept in them. His eyes were red, not from crying, from not sleeping. His face had the look of a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had finally run out of the strength to carry it any further. He stopped just inside the door. Harlan set his book down on the blanket and looked at him. "Boyd." "Dad." "Come, sit down." Boyd walked to the chair beside the bed. He sat down heavily. His hands were in his lap. He was looking at them the way people look at their hands when they are ashamed of what those hands have done. "I know what you think," Boyd said. His voice was rough, unsteady. "I know what Frank found. I know about the calls to Arthur's office. I know about the club. I know what it looks like." "Tell me what it is," Harlan said. Boyd swallowed. "I owe $2.1 million, he said, to 3 different people. One of them is the kind of person you don't owe money to. I went back to the tables 8 months ago. I told myself it was just 1 night. Then it was 2 nights. Then it was a week. Then I was in so deep that I couldn't tell anyone, because telling someone would mean admitting that I had thrown away everything you paid for the first time around." He stopped. "I called Arthur because I was desperate. I wanted to know if there was some way to access my inheritance early, a loan against the estate, an advance, something. I didn't know what I was asking. I just knew I needed money and I didn't know where else to turn. Why didn't you come to me? Harlan asked. Boyd looked up at his father. His eyes were wet. Because the last time I came to you with this, you sat in your study and you looked at me and you said, I will help you this time, Boyd. But if you do this again, you will have to save yourself. And I remembered that. Every word. I have remembered it every day since. And I couldn't come to you again. I couldn't watch you look at me like that again. Harlan was quiet for a long time. He reached out and took his son's hand. Boyd's hand was shaking. Not a lot, just enough to feel. Boyd, Harlan said, I'm going to tell you something and I need you to hear it. Okay? I was wrong. What I said to you that day, I was wrong. Not about the gambling, about the rest of it. I made you feel that my love had a condition attached to it, that my help came with a limit. I made you feel that if you fell again, you would fall alone. And that was wrong. Because a father's job is not to set limits on how many times he will catch his son. A father's job is to keep catching. Boyd's face crumbled. He bent forward in the chair and put his head in his hands and cried the way grown men cry when they have been holding it in for so long that the release feels like something breaking. Harlan kept holding his son's hand. He did not say anything else for a while. He let Boyd cry. He let the room hold the sound of it, the rough, choking, exhausted sound of a man who had been drowning quietly for months and had finally found something to hold on to. When Boyd finally raised his head, Harlan squeezed his hand once. We are going to fix this, Harlan said. Together. Not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, because you are my son, and that is the only qualification that has ever mattered. Boyd wiped his face with the back of his hand. I heard about Jackie, he said quietly. Garrett told me. I couldn't believe it. I still can't. I know. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I was so wrapped up in my own disaster that I wasn't paying attention to yours. Harlan shook his head slowly. We all make mistakes, Boyd. The ones that matter are the ones we keep making. So stop making this one. Boyd nodded. He sat with his father for 2 more hours. They did not talk about money again. They did not talk about Jackie or Victor Dane or the investigation. They talked about the hardware store in Detroit, about the time Boyd had accidentally driven a forklift through the back wall of the warehouse when he was 16, about Margaret, about Thanksgiving dinners when all 3 children were still young enough to sit at the same table without anyone leaving early. They talked about the things that mattered. And when Boyd left walking down the corridor with his shoulders a little straighter than when he had come in, Harlan lay back against the pillow and closed his eyes and felt something that he had not felt in a long time. Not relief, something better. The feeling of a thing being repaired. 6 weeks later, Harlan Ashford came home. He came home to the stone house in Connecticut where he had lived for almost 35 years. The house where Margaret had raised their 3 children. The house where the windows faced east, so the morning light came through the kitchen in long golden sheets that fell across the wooden floor like something spilled from heaven. He walked through the front door under his own power. He used a cane, a wooden one that Mrs. Brennan had found in the attic, one that had belonged to his own father decades ago. It felt right in his hand, solid, worn smooth by another man's grip. Garrett had moved into the guest wing on the south side of the house. He worked from the study during the day and had dinner with Harlan every evening. They talked about the company sometimes, but mostly they talked about other things. About the garden that needed attention, about the oak tree on the east lawn that was dropping branches, about whether the old dock down by the pond could be repaired or needed to be replaced. Elaine came on weekends. She drove down from Vermont with her dog and her paints and set up an easel in the sunroom where Margaret used to read. She painted the view from the window, the same view every visit, but each painting was different because the light was always different, and Elaine had finally learned that the light was the whole point. Boyd called every evening at 7 p.m. He had entered a residential treatment program in upstate New York. He was doing well. He sounded different on the phone, quieter, more careful with his words, like a man who was learning to mean what he said. Mrs. Brennan hummed in the kitchen again, softly, under her breath. Old songs that she had not hummed in years. She cooked too much food every night, and Harlan ate more of it than the doctors probably wanted him to. Jackie's things had been removed from the house. Her clothes, her perfume, her books. The photographs she had placed on shelves and mantels, photographs of herself and Harlan at events and dinners and vacations. All of it packed into boxes and placed in a storage unit that she would never visit because she would not be free to visit anything for a very long time. The divorce papers had been filed. The new will had been signed. The criminal case was moving through the courts slowly, the way criminal cases move when lawyers are involved, and motions are filed and dates are postponed and rescheduled. Victor Dane's trial was set for the spring. Jackie's was expected to follow. Claire Dunning had taken a plea deal and would testify against both of them. Harlan did not follow the legal proceedings closely. He left that to Garrett and to Arthur and to the prosecutors who seemed competent enough. He had spent his whole life managing things, managing the company, managing his children, managing his grief, managing his marriage. He was tired of managing. He wanted to sit on his porch and drink his coffee and watch the leaves turn colors in the yard. So that is what he did. On a quiet Saturday morning in late October, a small blue car pulled up the long gravel driveway of the Ashford estate. Harlan was sitting on the front porch. He had been sitting there since 8 a.m. waiting. He wore a thick flannel shirt and corduroy trousers and the kind of heavy leather shoes that men his age wore because they had been wearing them for 30 years and saw no reason to change. His beard was neatly trimmed. His cane leaned against the arm of the chair beside him. Garrett stood next to him, hands in his pockets, watching the car approach. The car stopped near the front steps. The engine ticked quietly as it cooled. The driver's door opened and a woman stepped out. Denise Harper. She was wearing a blue dress and a cardigan and shoes that looked new, as if she had bought them specifically for this visit. Her hair was pulled back neatly. She stood beside the car for a moment, looking at the house, looking at the trees, looking at the old man on the porch with the cane beside him and the white beard and the eyes that were watching her with a kind of attention that most people never receive from anyone. Then the back door opened. Lily climbed out. She was wearing a dress too, a yellow one with small white flowers on it. Her hair was in two careful braids. She was holding a small wrapped gift in both hands, carrying it in front of her like something precious that she did not want to drop. She looked up at the house. She looked at the trees. She looked at the stone steps and the wide porch and the man sitting in the chair. She did not look impressed. She did not look afraid. She looked the way she always looked, calm, steady, serious. Denise and Lily walked up the stone path together. Denise's hand was on her daughter's shoulder, not guiding her, steadying herself. When they reached the bottom of the porch steps, Harlan Ashford stood up. He stood slowly. He used the cane. His body was thinner than it had been before the surgery, and his movements had the careful deliberateness of a man who understood that his body was no longer the reliable instrument it had once been. But he stood, without help, without leaning on Garrett or the railing or anything except the cane in his own will. He looked down at the girl. "Lily," he said. His voice was rough, but warm, the kind of warm that comes from somewhere deeper than the throat. She looked up at him with the same eyes she had used in the hospital hallway. Dark, clear, unafraid. "I have been waiting a long time to meet you," Harlan said. She held the gift out toward him. "It's for you," she said. "I drew it." He took the package with both hands. His fingers were steady. He unwrapped it carefully, the way you unwrap something when you already know it matters more than anything you have received in a very long time. Inside was a piece of paper. It was covered in colored pencil, bright, confident strokes made by a hand that knew exactly what it wanted to draw. It showed a hospital room, a bed, a figure lying in the bed, small and still with white hair. Beside the bed, a pole with a clear bag hanging from it. And in the doorway, two figures. A tall man looking at the bag, a small girl looking up at the man. Harlan stared at the drawing. He stared at it for a long time. He saw the room where he had almost died. He saw the bag that had been meant to kill him. And he saw in the simple colored pencil lines of a child's drawing the exact moment that his life had been saved. "So you don't forget," Lily said quietly. Harlan looked at her. "No," he said. "So I don't forget." He reached down and placed his hand on the top of her head gently, the way a grandfather touches a child he has known his whole life. His hand was large and rough, and it trembled slightly. She did not pull away. That afternoon, Harlan asked Denise to sit with him on the back porch. The garden stretched out behind the house in long rolling rows of late-season roses and hedges that Mrs. Brennan kept trimmed with a precision that bordered on obsessive. The oak tree stood in the middle of the lawn, its leaves turning gold at the edges. The air was cool and smelled like earth and the faint sweetness of decay that comes with autumn. Lily was down in the garden with Garrett walking between the rose bushes, examining each one with the careful attention of a scientist studying specimens. Denise sat in the chair beside Harlan. She held a cup of tea that Mrs. Brennan had brought out, her hands wrapped around it tightly as if she needed the warmth. "Mrs. Harper," Harlan said, "I want to tell you something and I want you to listen to all of it before you respond." Denise nodded. "I have set aside a fund in your daughter's name. The fund will cover any school Lily wants to attend anywhere in this country, all the way through the highest degree she ever wants to earn. College, graduate school, medical school, law school, whatever she wants. It is already established. It cannot be taken back." Denise's hands tightened on the cup. "There is also a separate account for you," Harlan continued. "Enough that you will never have to clean another hospital floor if you don't want to. Enough that you will have choices. Real choices. The kind of choices that everyone deserves but not everyone gets." Denise was very still. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I cannot accept this." "You don't have to accept it," Harlan said. "It is not an offer. It is already done. The documents are signed. The money is there. It will be there whether you accept it today or next year or 10 years from now." "But why? She's a child. She just told your son to look at a bag. That's all she did." "Mrs. Harper." Harlan turned to face her. His eyes were very clear. "Your daughter did not just tell my son to look at a bag. Your daughter saved my life. She did it with 5 words and a courage that most adults I have known in 71 years have never demonstrated. She saw something wrong and she spoke up. In a world that teaches children to be quiet and stay out of the way, your daughter chose to be loud at exactly the right moment." He paused. "This is not payment. Payment can be refused. This is something else. This is gratitude. And gratitude, when it is real, is not a debt. It is just part of how a life is supposed to work." Denise set the tea down on the small table between their chairs. She cried. Not the way she had cried in the hospital, that quiet, exhausted weeping of a woman who could not afford to break down. This time she cried openly, fully, with her whole body. She cried the way people cry when something they never dared to hope for arrives without warning and rearranges every expectation they ever had about how their life was going to go. Harlan sat beside her and did not speak. He let her have the moment. It belonged to her. Later, when the sun was beginning to set and the long shadows of the trees were stretching across the lawn like fingers reaching for something they could not quite touch, Garrett walked Lily down to the rose garden at the edge of the property. He showed her a small wooden bench beneath the old oak tree. The bench was weathered and soft with age. The wood had turned silver from years of rain and sun. "My mother used to sit here," Garrett said. "When I was about your age, she would come down here in the afternoons and read. Sometimes I would come with her and just sit. We didn't always talk. Sometimes the sitting was enough." Lily looked at the bench. She ran her hand along the wood. "You can come here any time," Garrett said. "This place is part of your life now. You earned that." She thought about that for a moment, the way she thought about everything, carefully. "My mother says doing the right thing isn't a job," she said. "It's just who you are." Garrett smiled. He had heard a sentence very much like that once before. His mother had said something like it years ago, sitting on this very bench with her book in her lap and the afternoon light turning her hair the color of copper. He looked up toward the porch. Harlan was standing there, leaning on his cane, his hand resting on his beard, fingers moving slowly through the white hair in that familiar gesture that had carried him through 50 years of hard decisions and quiet reckonings. The old man was watching them. His son and the girl who had saved his life standing together in the garden where his first wife used to read in the long golden light of an October afternoon that looked like something a painter would try to capture and never quite get right. Harlan Ashford was 71 years old. He had wire in his chest and a beard that had gone white and a cane that had belonged to his father. He had built a company and lost a wife and been betrayed by another. He had nearly died in a hospital bed from a poison that was designed to look like a broken heart. But he was standing on his own porch watching his son walk through a garden with a 9-year-old girl who had taught him something that 71 years of living had not quite managed to teach him. That the wisest voices do not come from boardrooms or corner offices or the stages where important men give important speeches. They come from the people you walk past every day without really seeing. The janitor's daughter, the woman mopping the floor at midnight, the child carrying towels in a hospital hallway who stops a stranger and says 5 words that change everything. Check your father's IV bag. Harlan stood on the porch and watched the last of the sunlight move across the garden. He did not go inside. He did not check his phone. He did not think about the company or the will or the trial or the woman who had tried to kill him. He just stood there. An old man with a beard and a cane watching 2 people he loved walk through a garden in the fading light. And for the first time in a very long time, he was not in motion. He was still, and the stillness felt like enough.